You're listening to episode 33 of the Confident Rider podcast with Jane Pike. I have a fun one for you today. I am talking with Kelly Wilson, who some of you will know as 1/3 of the dynamic team that is the Wilson sisters. She is an accomplished author, photographer, wild horse trainer, and all-round lovely person, if I do say so myself. She's also just released her 13th book called Taming the Wild that details all of the knowledge she's gained through her extensive work with wild horses across the globe. Now, in New Zealand, Kelly and her family have done an incredible job bringing the plight of the Kaimanawas, New Zealand's wild horses, to the attention of the public. And she's also been offering month-long wild horse workshops where she mentors a select group of people through the process of basically transitioning a horse from the wild through to domestication. Applications for that are currently open for the next round. So if you're interested, you can find out more about that on Kelly's site, kellywilson.nz. Kelly and I would love to hear your thoughts. So if you listen to this episode and enjoy it, please share it with your friends and of course tag us in. We would love to hear from you. And now on to the main part of the show. Heads up team, the audio is a little sketchy in parts. The internet connection between us was being pesky. But nonetheless, there's so much goodness packed in here. I know you are going to love it. Okay, so I am very excited to be here with the wonderful Kelly Wilson, who has just released, gosh, what number book is this for you?
13th.
13, lucky number 13. Taming the Wild, which is a fabulous book that encompasses parts of your life about training horses, but really it's a manual about how it is we can go through the process of taming a wild horse ourselves, right? Is that the modus operandi?
Yeah, absolutely. We all found that we were working with the horses. It was really trial and error. And so we've been learning from the horses themselves because there just isn't resources out there, and a lot of owners that we've had take on Kaimanawas have been struggling and not knowing what to do. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's not enough people to go around and sort of give one-on-one information to every individual that saves a wild horse. And so that's sort of the purpose of this book, to give them the skills needed to be able to work through it with slightly less sort of mistakes that they might have otherwise.
Yeah, you've done a beautiful job. I was just saying to you before that it's so readable and engaging, and I was totally enthralled all the way through. So congratulations. So I've got ahead of myself. Anyway, Kelly Wilson, if you're in New Zealand, most of everyone is going to know who you are. And I'm sure that a large part of my audience will know already. But if we take it from the top, you are so many things, and you're great at so many things. Like reading your website, I'm like, wow, you've really got it going on. It's so impressive. So you are an author, a photographer, an adventurer, a wild horse trainer. There are so many things happening. Do you want to talk a little bit about all of these different elements and what it is you find yourself doing at the moment?
Yeah, so I went to university originally to study design and was planning to be a graphic designer, and I actually found myself living in the city doing the kind of Auckland lifestyle. And then in 2012, we got the opportunity to save 11 wild horses from slaughter. Mm-hmm. And that decision to work with them totally changed my life and has set me on this quite incredible journey working with wild horses. It's brought me back to show jumping, and then by default we've had our reality TV show and now 13 books published. So there's been quite a lot of things happening over the last 7 years.
So much. And what I love about it is you and your sisters, you each have really distinct and separate strengths which have come together to form this beautiful cohesive whole, which seems to have threaded through the entire journey. You've learnt so much of each other and complemented each other, and all of the different aspects that we've described, like your photography and your writing affinity, have really allowed you to bring to the forefront the work that you're trying to do in a much bigger way.
Yes, absolutely. Because most people, if they've got incredible skill, they might just be a horse trainer, and then they might not have the ability to sort of inspire people because they're not able to sort of, I guess, show people what they're doing and give people that journey. Vicky is honestly an incredible trainer, and she's obviously won the World Championships of colt starting twice now. But it's definitely been sort of the photography behind the scenes, our work with wild horses, and that sort of public image and persona that got her the invitation to even have that opportunity in the first place, because we were over in Australia working with wild brumbies when she got scouted to compete. And so sort of through the three of us working together, we've actually ended up with just truly some incredible opportunities that largely is thanks to our work with the wild horses.
Yeah, it's so cool. And actually one of the beautiful quotes that you wrote in the book and that I've written in front of me here is to do with luck. And one of the quote that I always go back to prior to reading this was that luck is where opportunity and preparedness meet, that you have to be kind of ready to embrace what it is that comes in front of you to be able to take it further, essentially. And you've got this beautiful sentence, which is, luck is merely opportunities presented to us by chance. And then our success or failure is actually based on how well we're prepared to embrace that when luck presents. And I think that's so cool because, you know, there's so much, it's so easy to miss those opportunities and really not take them for what they are and kind of run with them.
Yeah, because this all stems, like our recent work, all stems back to Watch Me Move winning the Pony of the Year show jumping Grand Prix in 2012. And, you know, he could have just won Pony of the Year, full stop.
Yeah.
And it could be this thing, oh, you know, this Kaimanawa that we used to own won Pony of the Year. And nothing that has stemmed from it could have ever happened. So yeah, it is incredible that we, you know, seized that opportunity at the time, and then it's sort of snowballed and led us to where we are now.
He was kind of the linchpin in you going into the ranges and being a part of the muster or seeing what happened. Can you tell us a little bit about the backstory of how you first came to recognise what was happening and the plight of the Kaimanawas at that stage?
So Watch Me Move was just a pony we bought from a dealer's yard for $500. He was a Kaimanawa. And then we sort of trained him up, taught him to jump, and our friend bought him off us. And so we continued mentoring her, and then they went on to win this Grand Prix. And in her interview afterwards, she kind of, my once wild pony has won this competition, and the media just ran with it. And so that was sort of the big media that kind of started everything. And because of it, she got invited down to the Kaimanawa Ranges to see the wild herds, and she invited us to go with her. And that was the first time we actually realised that New Zealand's wild horses were being rounded up and sent to slaughter. Before that, we kind of loosely knew that we had wild horses in our country. We'd never really seen them. They were kind of almost more myth than reality. But to hear that not only were they being culled, but the majority were going to slaughter because no one with the experience was willing to take horses over the age of 4 was quite heartbreaking, because for us, didn't seem any different to the feral ponies that we'd tamed as kids growing up.
Yeah, and it's, like you say, up until recently, the Brumbies in Australia, for instance, are such a part of the cultural narrative, and the Mustangs in America, you know, the threads of that just go back really far, and it's something that you typically associate with those places, even if you're not a horse person. But the Kaimanawa, really, it's only been since, when would you say, like the last sort of 7 or 8 years that they've really come to the forefront of the public awareness in a bigger way?
Well, that's why we were really passionate about sharing the plight, because if our family, who was quite notable in the horse scene, and, you know, if anyone should have known, we should have known more, and had no idea about the plight of our wild Kaimanawas, then of course the general public wouldn't either.
Yeah.
And so that was in 2012, and there really wasn't much talk about them. No one really understood. There certainly wasn't much communication about the fact that they were being culled.
Yeah.
And unless you were sort of a part of that sort of really niche Kaimanawa group, I guess it wasn't common knowledge.
So you guys hatched a plan basically to create this Stallion challenge that premiered at Equidays. Is that right?
That was a couple of years later.
Okay.
And originally, our idea to raise awareness was to actually film a documentary, to have Vicky train a couple of stallions and then video it, and then hopefully the documentary would showcase that these horses are trainable. But then through that process, we actually got 11 horses. We did realise that they are trainable, but the older stallions definitely required professional handlers.
Yeah.
So we came up with the concept of the Stallion Challenge the following muster in 2014 because we felt that if there was an incentive for professionals to come on board, then it would ensure the life of these older stallions being saved and everything. Every older stallion since then has been rehomed, which has just been fabulous.
So fabulous. That was actually one of the standout points of it wasn't this book. What's your Stallion? Oh my goodness, I've just forgotten the title. Stallion Challenges, yeah, where it was brought to the forefront, or this idea that the older stallions were untamable, basically, and you broke that myth, kind of like blew it out of the ballpark, basically.
Yeah, and I just think that, someone told me many years later that they had, they'd never felt guilt that all the older horses went to slaughter because they didn't feel like they'd ever adapt to domestication anyway. But then after seeing the work that we did and how happily the horses could adjust, they just said they felt so guilty over the hundreds of horses that had been unfairly slaughtered because they had believed that they would never be trainable.
Yeah, it's quite heartbreaking to think about it, isn't it?
Yeah. But then saying that they also didn't have the homes back then because there wasn't that public awareness.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And they've been doing a great job within the resources and capacity that they have to get everything as far as possible. What I love as well is that, I love so much, I'm going to say that word over and over, but when I think about my own story and I look back, like as I was going through the motions, all these random bits of study and life experience at the time didn't really add up or make sense to me in terms of where it was I was going. And I think that you can really only connect the dots by looking back sometimes. And for you guys, it seems like there's so much purpose and destiny, if you like, if you want to get really into it, in terms of like your background and everything that was a part of it made it the perfect alchemy, or made you guys the perfect people to really take this and run with it, given all of the experience you did have with the ponies that you came into the custody of as young people, and how you worked with some quite wild horses right back from the beginning.
Yeah, it was a perfect training ground, actually, because we grew up with absolutely no money. And when I was 7, so Vicky must have been 9 and Amanda was 5, Vicky was in need of a new pony, and our parents couldn't afford pretty much anything, really. And so we heard of these mountain ponies that were running wild for $50 each, and that was within our budget. And so we rounded 4 up and brought them home and started taming them. And, we were just kids, and we honestly had no idea. We didn't have stockyards, so we had borrowed them off the neighbours. We couldn't afford hay to feed them, so we were cutting grass from the side of the roads into wheelbarrows. They really became our teachers, because obviously we made mistakes and we were intelligent enough to realise and acknowledge mistakes and learn from them. And so every horse since that we've trained, we've strived to be better and, started better. And the same with the Kaimanawas in 2012, the way we were taming them back then, while we were still getting incredible results, obviously isn't as smooth as we are now. And so I think one of the biggest things, and not only the opportunities we've had with semi-feral ponies, but also our ability to be open to learning and to continuously evolve to be better for the horses.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think one of the standouts of your process as well, and maybe we can speak a little bit to this, is that when we're transferring horses from a wild situation or a really freedom-based situation into domestication, to me, one of the key attributes, I guess, or key aims would be to preserve their spirit and to allow them to keep that sense of uniqueness without dulling it down, but also transition them into, normal, in quote unquote, life as easily as possible. So how do you go about doing that? Are there some key elements that you pay attention to, or are there things which you believe are a part of your process that allows them to maintain that spirit and zest for life within everything that they've gone through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, but for the Kaimanawas, they are, living their best life, pretty much an equine paradise in the mountains. And sure, they can have some hoof issues and teeth issues and, injuries from stallion fights. So there are definitely ways humans can help them. But in terms of the muster process, they literally were free, and then we became their captors and basically put them into jail cells. And so that's all happened within 48 hours. They've been removed from their families. They've been put into small enclosures. And that's really mentally challenging for these horses. And so one of our biggest aims when we're working with them is how quickly can we restore freedom to. And so Italy is you'll see in the process sort of in the book about how we handle the using their body language that they're on and confident around us. We're not keeping them in the yards. We're taking them straight to the beach for adventures, straight out on the farm. We take them swimming in the river. And normally this is sort of within the first few weeks of handling. Well, obviously we've got stallions sometimes that it's maybe 6 months before they're at that point. And if that's the case, then it's what can we do in the short term to make this as easy as possible, because obviously keeping them in yards for 6 months is not viable. Mm-hmm. And so we'll set up paddocks or pastures with high enough fences so that they have some freedom in between. But from the 2018 muster, it was only one stallion that of the 24 horses that needed that extra time. But straight away it was like, we can't leave him in these yards. He needs mm-hmm. some companionship was really important. So he had a domestic friend with him the whole time. Mm-hmm. Just because they can't mentally cope with the changes if they're isolated and depressed and lonely, and there's nothing to stimulate them. So there are a lot of things that we're trying to consider when we're working with them, not just can we get a halter on them and, you know, eventually ride them.
And that specific portion of the mustering process with the Kaimanawas, where they're brought in by helicopter, albeit in a very humane and compassionate way, is quite different to the Brumbies and the Mustangs. Like they have a period of assimilation, I guess, before they come into more domestic
so the Mustangs are on one extreme, so they're also helicopter mustered, and then they normally have a stand-down period of at least a year. Mm-hmm. In the BLM yards, obviously, some of them are born in there because the mares were mustered in foal, or they came in as foals and been in for 6 or 7 years. Mm-hmm. And then the Brumbies are kind of like halfway in between. They're actually passively trapped, so they have baited sites and they're trapped into these yards. And then they have, at the Victoria Brumby Association, who we work with in Australia, the mares have 18-month stand-down time where they roam on a 50-acre pasture, and that gives them time to have their foals and then to wean them. Mm-hmm. And then the stallions have a 9-month stand-down time, and they are already gelded. So both in America and Australia, you're working with geldings and mares that don't have foals at foot or are pregnant. Where with the New Zealand wild horses, you're literally working with stallions, mares that have just had a foal wean, like possibly the day before, or a mare that is pregnant and is going to be having a foal in the next few months.
So in terms of access, I guess the Kaimanawas are amongst the most wild that we would have the possibility to domesticate given that process.
Absolutely. I've just travelled the world photographing for a new book about the world's wild horses, and New Zealand is probably one of the most authentic learning experiences possible with wild horses. And one of my workshop people was a Mustang trainer from America who came to New Zealand specifically to train here mm-hmm. because she doesn't have an opportunity anywhere else in the world to work with stallions.
So interesting. So I don't know if this is kind of a valid question given the nature of it, but do you notice a distinct difference or attributes that are specific to the Kaimanawas, the Mustangs and the Brumbies?
So from walking among the bands in the wild and observing them passively, I would say a wild horse is a wild horse pretty much mm-hmm. anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. There's different elements of wild. The Australian desert Brumbies, I think, would be the most wild and reactive, even with camouflage hides on us and the GoPros are being covered in camouflage. Mm. The horses knew we were there and just were highly sort of reactive. And then in other countries you can sort of walk among them and they're not going to mind. But when it comes to taming them, the difference really comes down to how they're managed and how they've been interacted with mm-hmm. by people during the mustering and captive process. So the Mustangs are well desensitized, they understand fences, they understand people walking around them, moving mm-hmm. them. Mm-hmm. the Kaimanawas have no concept of that, and then the Brumbies are kind of halfway in between.
Very cool, very cool. I just had a little smile to myself thinking about the Brumbies being so reactive, because growing up in Australia, I'm conditioned to look out for snakes and different things in the grass. And so when I first came to New Zealand, walking through long grass was like a real psychological test for me, because that was just not something that I would do in Australia, because there's any number of things that could have been hiding in there. So I empathise with them on several different levels. Yeah. So coming back to your book now, Taming the Wild, which is also centred around the 2018 workshop that you ran with 18 wild horses. Is that the right number, 18?
I think we had 14 or 13 on the workshop, and then the next muster, I worked with another 5, and then I got another mare as well.
Okay, so that's
19 in total.
So do you want to tell us about the workshop and what the idea was behind that?
So 2018 was the biggest Kaimanawa muster we've seen in well over a decade, probably 2 decades. We're almost triple the number of horses we're going to slaughter. And so we had 300 horses needing homes.
What was the reason for that? What was the reason that so many were coming in this
The reason, I think, was really poor aerial counts in the past years. So they go out in helicopters and they count how many horses they are. And I think they'd miscounted, and then the year before had mustered barely anything. So this was we desperately need to get them back to 300, which they're supposed to be, and we're just going to take everything out at once. Yes, it had 300 horses facing slaughter, and they really didn't have the home that they needed. And so I was trying to think of ways that not only provided homes for the horses, but actually set them up to succeed. Because often if people don't really have the experience, it's not necessarily going to be an easy transition for the horses. Mm-hmm. And so in the past, we'd done initial handling a couple of times where we would handle it, and then after a month or 2 months, once the horse was able to be halted and lead and load, it would go to its new owner. And we'd found that the horses actually really struggle with that at times, because they've learned sort of one way of sort of our language, I guess, of training, and then to go to someone experienced, I guess, who are maybe a little bit clumsy with how they communicate with a horse, the horses can get quite confused. And so we didn't necessarily feel it was the best interest in the horse. It's fine if it's local and we can kind of help transition it a little bit, but if it's far away and it's kind of like, good luck, horse, you know?
Yeah, it's tough.
So in 2016, I mentored an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old as they tamed their first wild horse, and it was hugely successful. They were with me for 3 weeks and then were able to take them home and do everything themselves. And I thought that that was probably the kindest thing that I'd ever done for those 2 horses, because they've just been a success story from the get-go. And so I offered it again, and I kind of didn't really have an idea of ages, but again, it was mostly kids that were interested, which surprised me because it was during school time. Yeah. And so I ended up with 10 students from the age of 12 to 23, I think. Yeah, and so they each rehomed a wild horse. They were here training it. And then I also had a girl from Australia and 2 from America that handled wild horses for other owners that couldn't attend the workshop, but then to make those horses transition to domestication smoother, each of its new owners had 10 lessons before the horses went to them. Yeah, it's such an important part of the success formula. Hey, you're only dealing with the one side of the equation, really, if you do all the work with the horse and then see them on their way, although it seems like, sometimes the best option. Yeah, that totally makes sense. One of the things that actually I read in your book as well, sorry, we're just breaking up a little bit, so apologies if I think sometimes we don't realise, and I'm referring to you guys in terms of your level of experience and competence, just how much you modify your behaviour and do things unconsciously around the horses that you wouldn't necessarily think to communicate to someone until you see them do it in a different way. And so that workshop environment must have given you the chance to really notice how people are, or their lack of awareness around the wild horses and how it was they needed to modify their own behaviour. I absolutely could not have written Taming the Wild if it hadn't have been for that workshop, because although I knew everything, I didn't know necessarily what I knew, and it wasn't until I had to talk other people through it. And I mean, such a wide variety of people. I was talking through 12-year-old beginner riders that had they don't
That
even know
blows
how
my
to canter.
mind, actually. It blows my mind.
So they don't even know how to canter a horse. So in terms of like the level of experience, they are really basic. And then obviously I have other ones that have trained mini Mustangs and, Grand Prix show jump riders, to be able to talk it through with someone and then have to talk it through with someone different and then talk it through to someone different. It kind of becomes this cohesive sort of way of working with the horses. And there was an underlying pattern for every trainer and every horse. It for sure evolved and adapted to suit each individual horse and person, but the underlying pattern was there. And that's where I saw there actually was the potential for a book like Taming the Wild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fantastic. And I guess the double-edged sword of the exposure that you guys have been getting with them is that there potentially also is this romanticized idea of what it means to have a wild horse, and then kind of people overrating their capacity or not even understanding necessarily what that means or what it takes to actually handle a horse straight from the wild. So this is really progressive and gives you a step-by-step process of what that looks like from the start, hey, and how to kind of merge through that process in a way that helps both you and obviously ultimately the horse.
Yeah, for sure. Then there is the other side where I have all these kids that have been so successful, so other kids possibly think that they can do it just by reading the book.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of people are taking them anyway without the knowledge and making mistakes. So hopefully with the book, it eliminates some of those mistakes, or at least makes them aware of how smoothly it can be done with professional mentoring. And hopefully they'll seek advice if things start going wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that by talking through and really emphasizing the horse's body language, if a horse is ever in a situation where it feels the need to take flight or fight or freeze, that the person actually sits back and goes, okay, what am I doing wrong? How am I communicating unclearly to my horse, and how can I make things simpler for it? Because there is that catch-22 where in some ways the book might empower people to think that they can now tame a horse because it's laid out for them. But unfortunately, it really is the smoothest way possible when you do have a professional mentor in you that has done it all before.
Absolutely. I know that you speak to this right at the start of the book, but if someone is out there considering taking a Kaimanawa and they're not sure about whether they have the skills or the capacity, what would you say are some good things to consider before considering taking a Kaimanawa or dealing with a horse from the wild?
So the best thing that I ever did was, I talk about it in the book, where I decided to intentionally improve my horsemanship in preparation for the 2018 muster. And that was a decision I made. I think the last time I'd tamed wild horses in New Zealand was 2014, and then I'd done the Brumbies and Mustangs since. And I was well aware that I was getting happy horses, but that I honestly felt I could do it smoother and be better trainer for the horses to make the transition easier. And so I went out and got 3 barely handled stallions from the bush in 2016, 2017. And then I applied everything that I would need to know with the Kaimanawas to these horses. And it actually worked out perfectly, because although these horses were barely handled, they'd had really bad handling, so they had a lot of trauma that needed to be worked through. And the beautiful thing about the techniques in Taming the Wild is that it works just as well on horses that have suffered trauma. A horse with issues or problems. I've got a mare here that is really bad to bridle, and she kind of panics when the bit's being put on. And so by using the same methods, I'm able to read her body language, help her feel reassured, and within a week or 2, the problem's gone. And so there's plenty of domestic horses or semi-feral horses that you can actually gain the skills needed to be able to work with a wild horse. And I think that's probably the vital sort of takeaway lesson that I would give. If you're not sure about taking a wild horse, then either try and get some mentoring or work in a workshop environment to take first one, so that you have the skills in the future to come, and as your domestic horses to gain the skills needed to make it as easy as possible when you do get a wild one.
Yeah, absolutely. That understanding of threshold, it seems, is so important, and so many accidents happen by not being able to decipher the body language from the horse or the messages that they're giving you to say, actually, that's a little bit too far, or I'm feeling a bit concerned about that. And I think that skill in and of itself just helps across the board. And it must be with the wild horses that everything is so much clearer than with the domestic horses. Like that line, once you've crossed it, it goes in both directions, for and against you, I imagine.
Yeah, and that's I think one of the biggest successes of the 2018 workshop is that I worked with 19 horses at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so normally I'd only work with 1 or 2 wild horses a year. And so basically I got 10 years worth of training from the horses in a 6-month period.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I could be 10 years from now reaching the same level of knowledge that I've just gained from just jam-packing it into one winter.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, if you're just getting a wild horse and maybe it's your first one or your only one, then you might assume or think that, you know, all wild horses are like that. But by working with so many different ages and types and mares and stallions, I now have a really broad understanding of what wild horse behaviour should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can now understand that if something's going wrong, is it because of me, or is it because of perhaps pain-related issues? So I kind of understand sort of what's normal and what falls above and below that line, which is, I think, is crucial in part of our success.
Yeah, absolutely. And that holistic overview from the start, are you looking to set them up so that as quickly as possible you can check all the likely suspects that might be pain-related, like teeth, like feet, like all of the normal things that you would check to make sure that the process is as easeful as possible? Is that where you begin from?
So when we're working with the wild horses, our focus certainly isn't to be able to get hands-on to work with the horses physically and work through any body issues they might have, because sometimes they just don't have any issues. But it's when you start seeing horses that are struggling, and they're struggling to make eye contact, they're really reactive. You can sort of see from their conformation or how their heads are being held that they've got issues. Mm-hmm. And so the 2 girls that were struggling with their horses definitely had horses that presented with problems physically. And so we accelerated the handling process by me giving them a few sessions, getting halters on, so that Vicky could actually come in and spend some time doing body work on them. And within a couple of treatments, they were totally different horses. They were relaxed, able to learn and think. And so basically, I guess in a human world, it was like they were dealing with a constant migraine. And so once that was dealt with, they were actually able to be in the moment and learn at the speed of a normal horse, which made a massive difference.
That's so wonderful. I posted in my members group yesterday asking if anyone had any questions. And one of the questions that came up was, how do you know when the time is right for you to first go into the yards with your horse? So is there certain things that you're looking out for, or is it, are there very obvious things that you tick off before you allow that to happen?
So the obviously before the horses arrive, there should be hay and water in the yard. So then that initial time they can just let down and be by themselves. Then after that, the most crucial thing that you can do is just to be watching their body language. It's the time for you to observe and to learn from the horses. Some don't mind you looking through the rails at them at all. Some are panicking with you like 10 metres away or 3 yards over. Mm-hmm. And so if there's ever a risk of a horse, you know, panicking and going through a fence, that's a really serious issue that you have to safely work between, because obviously you still need to feed and water it. Mm-hmm. And so if it's a situation like that where you have a really reactive horse, then we'll make sure it has multiple yards. And so if it is getting worried, it can go away through a gate into a next yard over, or even a next yard over, so that you can safely go in, give it water and food. But certainly if it's got to the point where it's going to be so stressed that it is panicking about you being in the yard, then it just needs more space. Mm-hmm. And until it can even be relaxed with you standing on the outside of the yard and not be kind of flinging to the far end of the yard, then it's probably not ready for you to even think about engaging with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's understanding that bubble that they have around them of personal space, I guess, and just how far that extends, which can be well outside of the yards.
Yeah, so one of my stallions this time, I think it was maybe a week or two before I could work in the yard with him. And before that, we were needing 3 yards for him at that time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. So do you think paying attention, or not do you think, paying attention to the physical setup that you have is actually really important as well, because you want to make sure that you're able to keep them within a really safe situation when they're first arriving, depending on how it is they're going to handle things.
Yeah, and, obviously there's property checks with KHH, and it's a little bit more relaxed if you're getting a younger horse. It's normally like the older mares and stallions that really struggle with that personal space. And it's not very often. So we've worked with about 50 wild Kaimanawas, and there's only been 2 that have needed multiple yards to be able to be safely, not at risk of jumping out and getting onto a road.
Yeah, so that's not the norm, what we're talking about necessarily.
Not the norm.
Yeah. So what is it that you think that's most surprised you about the Kaimanawas? What's been the most surprising part of the journey for you?
I think probably the most surprising is how much the public have embraced them. And that's something that we really appreciate, because they definitely need people to champion for their cause. And fortunately, the idea of saving wild horses does captivate the imagination of, people, horse people and unhorsed people. And one of my trainers that got one of the stallions last year, she said the same thing. She's got an unhorsey husband that hasn't been particularly supportive of her work with horses, but absolutely loves her journey with the wild horses, and he'll take her now gelded Kaimanawa out on adventures with him leading it and her riding her riding horse.
I love that.
He just loves, the idea of the wild horses, and so he now joins in on her horsey adventures.
That's awesome.
And I hear things like that often. So I think they really have the ability to sort of reach a wider audience, and I think that's a really awesome sort of tribute to the horses that they're able to make such an impact.
That's really cool. And on a personal level, what do you think your biggest takeaway has been from the work that you've done with them and training the way that you have with them?
From a personal level, I love that they constantly teach me how little I know. And I think that's probably my favourite thing as a horse trainer, that without fail, every single horse that I work with teaches me something else. And it's been an awesome journey so far, and I am incredibly excited to see what else I can learn from them.
So much fabulousness. When you have show jumpers as well, or you have Sinatra, your show jumper, is he your main horse behind the scenes? Yeah.
So I do show jump pony Grand Prix and up to 1.30 metre, and then I retired one of my horses in 2015, and it's taken me quite a long time to find another horse I like as much. And now I have 2, Showtime Moonlight and Showtime Sinatra, who are pretty awesome. They both do Liberty. Sinatra's learning bridleless, and then they also show jump and do a little bit of cross country in between as well.
That's really cool. And I can imagine there's quite a lot of crossover knowledge, or how could there not be really, between how it is you work with your show jumpers and how it is you're working with the Kais.
I think we've always been a little bit unorthodox in how we work with our show jumpers. A lot of the fun that we have is swimming them in the river for fitness and beach riding and taking them out on the farms. And by default, that's also what we do with the Kaimanawas. So I think it's just sort of how we got brought up. But so it's only been in recent years that we've kind of understood that's not normal, because that's just how it's
that was your normal.
So I guess another surprising thing is that the more exposure we have and the more we see and do, the more we realise how abnormal we are. Because again, with the wild horses, we kind of just learned through trial and error and sort of evolved our own style. And then we went to America to work with Mustangs, and we saw some other trainers working with Mustangs, and it was totally different. And it wasn't really until then that we're like, oh, okay, we are really unique in how we do things. So I think that's been quite an eye-opener as well.
Yeah. So do you think there's more wild horse work for you on the horizon overseas as well?
We'd love to go back and work with the Mustangs again. we definitely feel like that was the time of our lives, basically, in 2015 Mustang ride. And we have a huge love for both America and the Mustangs over there, and also with the Brumbies. And I suppose those three populations, New Zealand, Australia and America, are really the three main ones that actually have wild horse management sort of issues, because they have some of the largest populations in the world. The only other one is Canada, which I think is the third highest population of sort of wild horses. But Canada actually is managed by predators, so they still have the wolves and the bears that maintain that population. Yeah,
that's not a human controlled issue there.
Yeah.
Very cool. So if people are listening and they want to buy your book or learn more about you and the workshop that you offer, where is the best place for them to go?
My website, www.kellywilson.nz, has sort of information about the books and me. The workshop, you can sort of find out more on my social media pages, which is Kelly Wilson Author on Facebook and Kelly Wilson NZ on Instagram. But yeah, the workshop's something I'm super excited about for next year.
That's really cool. Are you taking applications for that already, or when does that kick off?
Yes, I just started promoting it last week, but we are still 6 months away from the muster. Yeah, and what I like to do is I'll get a large sort of interest in the workshop, and then there'll be sort of an interview process, and then I'll pick and choose which 12 I think are most suited for it.
I was actually really excited to hear about your workshop, because as a South Islander, it's obviously not a possibility to get a horse yourself as a direct line, given the geographical distance. So it seemed like a great interim option for the future.
Yeah, we had 2 South Island horses that we trained last year. One of the girls was up here, did the workshop, and then another one we trained the horse on behalf, and then she flew up and had a 3-day of lessons with it, and then they both went back to the South Island together.
That's really cool.
That was awesome.
Really cool. Oh, thank you so much for joining me today and for all the work that you're doing. I so appreciate it.
Thank you, Jane. It was fun.
Those details for you again. If you're keen to connect up with Kelly or find out more about her work, you can do so by visiting her website, www.kellywilson.nz, and I'll put all the links to her social media in the show notes also. Her latest book, Taming the Wild, is out now, and you can find that through Penguin Books, at a bookstore near you, or from the Wilson Sisters shop, wilsonsisters.nz. If it's me you're after, you can find me on my website, confidentrider.online. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and I'm really excited to chat with you in the next episode.